a virus that was already a pandemic, global pandemic states is really uniquely a U.S. cultural uh, glo- cultural health issue, and that's gun violence that seems to be raging with the recent shooting of Charlie Kirk. Uh, and that same day later, there was a school shooting.
Yes.
It seems as though we are almost
And not long ago,
becoming
there was a shooting
immune.
of a congresswoman and her husband in Minnesota, and
Right.
school shooting there in Minnesota. They're happening seemingly every week, or maybe
Yeah.
even more often than that.
Yeah, violence seems to be, and gun violence seems to be almost a daily news story. But it's not just a news story. Families are devastated. And while I didn't agree with the politics of Charlie Kirk, I certainly, grieve for his family and for those thousands of other people that we don't know their names, who also lost their lives during the course of 24 hours in the United States. There are more guns than people in our country, Brad. There's
Isn't
something
that
wrong about
incredible?
that.
That is just ridiculous. It is just ridiculous. It breaks my heart. There's several things that break my heart, and with some of the things we've had conversations about, but the proliferation of guns, and I see them. It seems like I just see them more often just out in public. People carrying sidearms and things like this that I just seem to see a lot more often than I used to, including folks that don't look like they would normally have carried guns. Just they just don't have that. They're older women, for instance, and you know, people who just looks like they. I would have seen that not too long ago. But please go on. What's your gut reaction to all this? So what are you feeling in your soul about this terrible tragedy has happened? And so much of it happens in public. With so many cameras and so on.
Yeah.
I know this killing of Charlie Kirk, was witnessed by many people in person, and I have not seen it myself, but I know it exists on the internet. You can see the actual, goriness of the killing happening there. And I know, give me your reaction.
Well, people are traumatized for every shooting. Some say that it impacts anywhere from 6 to 25 other people, including family, friends, and people who witness shootings, and as in this case. And it's a sad commentary if we're now at a point in our society where political discourse or difference of opinion can be a major contributing factor to violence.
Yes.
I don't know all the background to what prompted the shooter, but I do know that we are currently in an environment that after the shooting, people are attending. People who have a public platform often tend to point fingers, and sometimes it seems to be a partisan thing.
Yeah.
Liberals are responsible for this, or those on the radical right or the radical left. And I am just convinced, Brad, that God is not pleased at all.
Oh, of course
God
not.
cannot be pleased
Of course not.
with the
Yeah.
way in which we have 340 something million people, I believe, in the United States, and over 400 plus million guns.
Hmm.
Some say that that's an understatement. And every time there's a shooting like this shooting, they say that gun sales go up
Oh, of
within
course.
48 hours.
Yeah, and you could almost feel the tensions rising, the heat going up. That that someone's out there is going to, try to take a reprisal or revenge somewhere. That they are, at least it's crossing their mind. But I'd like to throw something else out to you about this whole violence thing, just for us to think about. We got this political stuff and that kind of thing going on as a part of it, the siloing that happening and people, us and them. But I read, I was talking about this with a colleague of mine in the podcasting world just this morning a little bit, and he pointed me to a couple of books and resources. But basically, how many of these shooters are young white men who are lost and searching for meaningfulness, and they sometimes they're jobless, and sometimes they are not, they're lonely, they're upset, they're without direction, and they're finding some solace in online stuff and some extremist kind of things where they find some connection to community. And sometimes those things lead them to, be radicalized in some form or another. And so the premise of what this friend of mine was pointing me to is that it's not always the political thing. It's just people searching for meaningfulness in community, and they're finding it in some violent places. I just want to throw that out to you. What do you think? Do you think there's anything to this kind of this
I
premise?
think people, yeah, people are finding a way to be heard, and this is a destructive way for that to happen. I don't want to paint with too broad a brush because stereotypes are not helpful, but often, there's sometimes a reflection on the whole notion of the gaming society. You may be even familiar with that, but
Yeah,
even a lot of the gaming, in terms of folks who spend a lot of times with controllers in their hand
sure.
and competing in some of the games are pretty violent.
Yeah.
And we've kind of built into our society this notion that there's a casual way to relate to violence without that somehow poisoning our spirit theologically.
Mm.
Uh, I think our theology really needs to step up as well. I just was introduced recently. You may be familiar with the Croatian theologian Miroslav Volf.
I am not,
Uh,
but
yeah,
please go on.
he studied under Moltmann.
Okay.
But he says theology is not only about understanding the world; it's about mending the world.
Mm.
And so, Brad,
Love that.
part of our my goal is to encourage 2 million people to be participants in mending the world, not just
Yes.
talking about uh, the travesties, not just talking about the faults of history, not just talking about arguing about what constitutes truth, but how do we participate? Those of us who are followers of Christ and believe in a God of love, how do we participate both in our theology, our thinking, and our actions in mending the world?
Mm.
Uh,
Because on the other
Blessed
side,
are the peacemakers. Blessed are the peacemakers, not the mass shooters. The Bible doesn't say blessed are those who carry out uh, assassinations or who carry out murder, but blessed are the peacemakers. In fact, in Proverbs 6 says there are 6 things that God hates.
yes.
Here's what it says in Proverbs 6, verse 16. There are 6 things that the Lord hates, 7 that are an abomination to God: a haughty eye, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood, a heart that devises wicked plans, feet that hurry to run to evil, a lying witness who testifies falsely, and one who sows discord in the family. It troubles me. I don't relate at all to the politics, at least the little bit that I know about Charlie Kirk and that I have heard.
Per,
Uh, but I certainly don't believe that his politics or even his insults or anybody's insults or whatever that I might find offensive warrant this kind of action. Nor do I believe that the people who are not as who are not as famous or will not be lifted up in the same way that he has been um, deserve what has happened. I have no room in my heart to hate anybody.
mm.
Uh, you don't have to be my best friend uh, for me not to certainly consider you an enemy that's worthy of me feeling somehow anyway justified to commit violence towards you or any other person. There's a the same theologian says, Miroslav Volf says, there's a thin but zealous practice of Christian faith that likely fosters violence,
Mm.
but there's a thick and connected practice of Christian faith that can generate and sustain a culture of peace. That if we just want to, I think that's part of the fallacy I find with at least the notion of Christian nationalism. There's This zealous about it that often links itself with an understanding that violence is okay. But if we really take our faith seriously, we've got to embrace the demand from Jesus Christ that we be peace builders and peacemakers.
Yes, indeed. And so much of what we hear around this violence rhetoric is a language like retribution, revenge, uh, bloodshed, things like that. That's very, very prevalent in what you hear in the rhetoric and the propaganda, I would say, from many people, including people who profess to be Christians. And I find that so incredibly troubling. And I'm just having a hard time, Bishop, coming to terms that that is anywhere in the Christian thinking, anywhere even close. It's not there. And so help us sort it out. You've mentioned here about this theologian and about this mending that needs to take place. If there's mending that needs to take place, that means things have been rendered apart as well. So, what are some actions do you think that we can take as Christians, as churches, as men and women of faith who have a faith that is believers in this Christ, as you said, the peace builder? What are some
Mm.
things we can do in a practical manner in our churches or communities, or when we know somebody who is violent or has leaning towards violence, or maybe they have a gun and maybe they shouldn't have a gun for
Mm.
mental health reasons or anything else? What are some things that we can do about it?
I think we need to be interrupters of of violence, and I think
Mm,
we need to be interrupters of isolation as well.
yeah.
Years ago, when there was this major heat wave in Chicago, if you remember, it was happening at many places. So many people died,
Yes.
and when they did the social autopsy of that heat wave, they found out a lot of the seniors that died were because of living a life of isolation.
Yeah.
Uh, I think that the church really needs to be the church for others, and not only just the Christian faith, but all of us who profess a faith of any kind. Uh, Most religions espouse a commitment to peace and to respect, not to violence. And I think we need to denounce violence, but also recognize that we've got to be able to engage each other on the level of human dignity. If somehow I can determine that someone is less than human, then violence becomes more acceptable towards that person. But
Yeah. Well, let me respond to you there in this way that it seems like if we're going to be building things up, that we need to find ways to help literally live out in a very tangible way the love your neighbor as yourself. That is the isolation you mentioned, is I believe that's a cause of this violent acting out. Then we need, as the church and as Christians, to literally be checking on our neighbors and others to uh, be helpful instead of hurtful, and to be connected instead of disconnected. And it seems to me the church, this is a great place for the church to step in. Do you think so? Maybe we can be a part of a solution rather than being, in some cases, a part of the problem.
I think by definition, as a colleague several years ago heard say, we cannot transform the world, Brad, by simply going to church or attending churches, but we can transform the world by being the church. And
Yes.
I believe when we really exegete that, if you will, when we extrapolate from that common, it's more than a cliche. Being the church literally means being the love of Jesus in real time in real places. And I think that's part of the message that Jesus was sharing in the story of the Good Samaritan. It's not about the differences that we have, but about our willingness to see the pain and the need of others, and to be able to share the resources that we have with others.
Hmm.
There's so much need for addressing mental health in our country, but also there's a need for addressing mutual respect. You
Yes.
know, if we start from a place of mutual respect, I respect you because you are a child of God, you are a human being, and we belong to the human family. Uh, then I don't have to diminish my own self or my own self respect.
Hmm.
It troubles me, Brad, even to read in the paper today about notions of civil war. That on Twitter after Charlie Kirk's murder, that there were thousands of hits or thousands of mention of civil war.
Yeah.
And what troubles me, that what civil war, that literally I think translates means that neighbors or citizens would be at war with each other.
Yeah.
Uh, as
It's
we
so
think
much,
about,
and so
yeah.
much of this happens in a reactionary way. Something, this act of violence happens, and I felt it myself. I felt anger rise up in me when something violent act has happened. And that goes to that kind of that feeling of revenge and retribution and things like that, which are ugly, ugly thoughts. But so much of this has been happening without even knowing the facts, without even knowing anything really about what
Hmm.
happened, other than a tragedy happened and people want to respond. And I find it interesting that, some people, when they want to respond immediately and categorize the shooter and the killers as a certain type of people or a certain religious background or a certain ethnic background or a certain approach to life, and didn't pay any attention to the facts when there weren't any facts available, and then kind of changed their tune when they found out it wasn't what they assumed it would be. A lot of assumptions being made here, my friend. And you know what happens when you assume, right? When you assume too much.
Absolutely, I do know what happens.
Yeah, and a lot of assuming is going on, and the people acting violently on those assumptions.
Yeah. But at the end of the day, somebody's father or somebody's mother or somebody's child is dead, and sometimes I say, so what if we know who or why a person does something like that? That my parents used to teach us. You were taught the same thing: two wrongs or three wrongs don't make a right.
Sure,
So
absolutely,
even
yeah.
when we see the tragedy and I think the devastation that continues to happen in Gaza, people say, "Don't you, well remember October the 7th?" I said, "Yeah," and then there was something before that, and there was something before that, there was something before that. Uh, an eye for an eye, then we
Well,
all end up blind.
Well, when has violence really ultimately worked in terms of, creating peace? I don't know. Maybe it has, perhaps, but it seems to me that violence often, more often than not, leads to more violence. And you got to break a pattern here. And I think Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and others have stepped forward to, offer peace, very, you know, the peace with justice, in terms of putting yourself on peaceful movements. And it seemed like the time has come for those who are peace lovers and lovers of Jesus Christ and lovers of uh, morality to step forward and say, okay, enough's enough, and we, in a peaceful, nonviolent way, are going to stand in the gap here and to be a part of things. I know some clergy here in Indiana, where you and I live at. I know you're in D.C. right now, but you live here much of the time in Indiana. Went to one of the places where refugees are being held, and I have my own pastor and some others went to speak out against that. And there was a little bit of pushback, but they made a statement that it's just not right for people to be held in detention centers without their due process and so on for simply being an immigrant. And I love
Mm.
that. And I just think it's going to take more of that. I don't know. I just want to put that out there. What do you think? Do you think the time is here for the church and others to be more and more involved with nonviolent efforts to stand in the gap?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I had a colleague who used to say years ago, he said it's all about relationships.
Yeah.
We cannot build a better society if we're not willing to really engage in relationships. I think part of Charlie Kirk's modus operandum was around debating, creating atmospheres for debate. But I think we need something other than just debates. I think
Yeah.
we really need an opportunity for us to serve together in places where we're building, where we are engaged in mission, we're engaged in acts of mercy and acts of justice that foster inclusion as opposed to division. In the Bible, First John 3:15, everyone who hates his brother is a murderer, and you know that no murderer has eternal life abiding in him. So there's no blessing for those who would choose to commit murder, uh, and and most of most of the murders that take place, uh, the gun violence that takes place, is not in defense of or protecting one's home or protecting
Yeah.
oneself. That most of it are homicides and suicides.
Yeah.
In fact, we have a higher rate of gun violence than India, which has 1.4 billion people, in China, or 1.5 billion, and China. Both of those countries have built over a billion citizens. We have 345 million, and we have twice the death rate of countries that have three times, four times the population that we have in the United States. Far fewer guns, uh, and literally many of these places there's no access for private citizens to have assault weapons, which you
Yeah.
can secure a weapon in the United States easier than you can secure some medications for allergies.
Oh, yeah.
And
Easier to get a gun license than a driver's license in many cases, and that's ridiculous. But also goes it shows here about how there are so many people who are distraught and upset, and suicidal rates, the suicide rates, as you mentioned, are skyrocketing, and that just shows kind of a corporate mental health crisis or that is going on. And therefore, I believe it's also a spiritual crisis that's going on, that people are claiming they know the Lord and claiming they know that that drives them, but really they're being driven by, it seems to me, something far apart from that. And if we can somehow reconnect to our love of Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, and also then live that out through not only through our churches, but through our churches that go out into the communities, and then be caring about these people with mental health conditions and so on. Uh, we got to be on the march. We got to be on the move. We got to be engaged, and we can complacency. There's no place for it anymore. That's kind of my soapbox there. Do you have any
well,
thoughts
I
about
think,
that?
yeah, Brad, I think once we have lost the notion that life, that the sacred nature of life is such that we have no ground to stand on to claim that we have the
Hmm.
right or the authority
Yes.
to to interrupt the sacred nature of life, to interrupt God's natural intention for people to live. And we can live amidst differences and even disagreement. And I would dare say we need not elevate our vitriol to such a way that we now feel that the next step is uh, some kind of opportunity to commit violence against another human being. We must be committed to being people of peace, and also pro- pro- promoting promoting the kind of respect and love for human dignity and human life that we want for ourselves. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Uh, and I believe that we don't just need a leader; we need leadership
Yes.
across the society, because this is a national health crisis. If you ask me, the notion of violence and the rhetoric of violence, that is what troubles me, Brad, in terms of what the data is saying about uh, Twitter Twitter feeds, as well as people on social media, the kind of rhetoric that is being promoted that basically said justifies
Yeah.
uh, uh, this kind of violence.
Justifies that. Well, let's bring this around this way, Bishop Trimble. Our conversation today here has been uh, framed in violence and murder, and that's precipitated our conversation here about gun violence and so on. It is incredibly depressing and incredibly discouraging. And yet, I got a feeling, because I know you to be basically an optimistic person, to be a person who really who deals with the tragedy at hand, doesn't sweep it under the rug, but also is looking for signs of encouragement, signs of light in the midst of darkness. So, if you don't mind, let's go there for a minute. What do you see in are some encouraging signs? What are some points of light in the midst of all this uh, violence that we've been speaking about here today? What do you see that's encouraging at all?
Well, I'm encouraged that the fact I'm encouraged that those of us who have any platform are inclined to really put a message of hope and respect, and to amplify that message of hope, respect, certainly prayers for those who have lost life and the families who are impacted by violence, but also engage in the kind of relationship building across theological and religious lines, across cultural and racial lines, that allows for that opportunity for us to really say, build the kind of world that we want to see happen. That was part of the reason that, after World War II and what we've seen, even though it's not a perfect institution, the notion behind the United Nations, Brad,
Yeah.
was that countries would come from all across the globe together and try to solve problems that really allowed for countries to live in peace and individual societies to thrive without violence. That's a that's an elementary explanation of the notion behind the United Nations.
Yeah.
But the fact that we are to be united, uh, uh, and and recognize that we can thrive in our various countries, uh, and still address issues like global hunger, global violence, global migration, and recognize that we should be doing that, not in isolation. So I'm a firm believer that many of the signs of hope that I have seen, particularly when I talk with younger people, I'll have a chance later this month to speak at one of our seminaries in Wesley Seminary in Washington, D.C. And I'm always encouraged by people who are still studying and committed to the way of peace, to the
Yes.
way of Christ. And
It sounds like you're encouraged, but there are people who are, yeah, they may be dismayed by what is happening, but they are not going to be beaten down, or they're not quitting, are they? And
right.
that's awesome. I think it's just going to take a very powerful investment of the church and of the civil, private sector and government sector in order to rebuild very intentionally peace. I just thinking even historically after World War II and even Vietnam War, our country, both nationally and economically and even intersocially, invested greatly in rebuilding Europe and rebuilding Japan, rebuilding Vietnam, rebuilding Korea, and all those countries are all pretty strong and relatively strong allies of the United States now because we invested in them. Why can't we do something internally to invest in the mental health of our country, invest in life, not in death and destruction, invest in that which is good? And I just kind of think that would be kind of a biblical investment too in a better world. So, well, Bishop, why don't you give us kind of a final word? You usually have something that's on your heart and mind that you want to share kind of as a good word to send out, particularly perhaps to that pastor or that person who's dealing with something, maybe even in their own home or church or situation where they've got some challenging people or situations to deal with, maybe even involving people with violent rhetoric.
I think we should never grow weary in our well doing. Uh, the book of Galatians speaks of that. Let us not grow weary in well doing. And I would say to all of us, uh, for me as a parent of adult children and a grandparent, I want to leave the world better for my grandchildren than what I'm experiencing, what I see now. I want them to know, my grandchildren, and I want my granddaughter and my grandchildren to know that the way of love and the way of peace is not a way of weakness, but a
Yes.
way of strength. I want those who preach and those who teach to know that the way of education and engagement and honoring the contributions of all people is a way of strength, not a way of weakness.
Yes.
And that God did not create us and then say that creation is good, for us then to live as though creation is somehow to be always at odds with one another.
I love that.
There's nothing like the joy of knowing uh, that not only are you loved, but that you have the capacity uh, to love and bring peace in the lives of other people. if you are an opportunity, have an opportunity to preach or to teach or to engage people at the workplace, bring with you a sense of, I see you, I honor you, I respect you.
Yes,
We don't
love that.
have to engage. We don't have to engage in debate. And then, even when we do engage in debate, we need not be defined by our politics, but by our personhood. We need not to be defined by our tribal allegiance, but by the fact that we're all part of the human family. And
Yes.
if we can do that, uh, we can recognize uh, that there is a more excellent way.
Well, I love to hear that. I'm just watching here and hear you say as we kind of bring this conversation to a close is the way of love, the way of Jesus, if you will, is a way of strength, not weakness. And that is an encouraging word. Thank you, Bishop, for sharing that encouraging word with us here today. And you've been listening to the To Be Encouraged podcast with Bishop Julius C. Trimble. This is the podcast where we look to offer an encouraging word to an often discouraged world.